Hello, welcome to Cerulean Arts Gallery. Tonight, this is the virtual tour and talk for the exhibition Dialogues of Place, taking place, on place, and engaging place, guest curated by Tom Csaszar, and featuring the work of Thea Abu El-Haj, Nancy Agati, Tom Csaszar, Mikel Elam, myself, Michael Kowbuz, Ying Li, Kate McCammon, Lisa Volta, and Mark Willie. So thanks for being here tonight. And Tom, I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, and perhaps after I'm finished with a few brief introductory remarks, everybody can kind of introduce themselves, and I see we can see some of the works from the show already. There's no real secret in how I put this together, and I assume it's obvious to all of you that I visited your studios and I selected works that I'd recently seen that I thought A, interested me, B, I liked looking at, and C, showed some way of developing ideas within the works and developing ideas actually between the works. As I went to your studios or saw your works online, I started to actually not actually take a specific idea I had that I started with. Actually, I started with your works and thought about, well, what is each work doing and why is it that I respond to it, or how is it that I respond to it? And how is it that the works develop among themselves? And I tried very hard to get more than one work by everyone, which I achieved all except Nancy Agati. However, and Nancy can kind of correct me and introduce herself first. I saw her work, which I'm familiar with because she works in the same studio building as I do, as kind of a compilation of a couple of her works, and thought that that's the work that's on right now that we can see, that it actually did show within the same work kind of the idea of the development of the work and the development of her works from different things such as maps, nature, rhythms of motion in nature and things like that. Am I able to share my screen? I'm going to try to do that and see if I can just put up a few brief things that came to me after I saw all of your works. And oops, it's clicking through things now. But there's some ideas that I developed as I looked at your works. One has to do with this idea that Teju Cole brings up in relation to Vermeer's works, that they're poetic and lyrical, but also are fractured, vulnerable, isolated, and anxious. And actually, I thought all of the
Tom,
works.
I can't hear you. Can you guys hear Tom?
Oh,
yes.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry, but I think my sound is up as far as it'll go. And so these are more things I thought about, I've been thinking about, but I thought more about after I saw each of your works. And Barry Schwabsky's statement is about kind of the everyday painting and the political, erotic, and mystical. I'm not going to read all of these in total, but what he says is, painting keeps trying to draw us closer to a sense of our own daily lives. And whatever is political, erotic, mystical, this everyday art is more necessary than ever. And Suzanne Hudson talks about how she regards material experimentation in works, which actually I think is wonderfully exhibited by all of the works being shown. That material experimentation is inherently conceptual, meaning that a painting is capable of manifesting its own signs, manifesting its own meaning, its own emotions, its own place in the world. This is to say it is capable of producing meaning from within, not merely process, but embodied meaning. And Wally Suryenko talks about the difference between viewing works as personal fantasies, and he describes works both in terms of theater and plays and poetry as expressing something fundamentally real, a primal reality. He uses this wonderful phrase, the hinterland of transition, the way things transition from one thing to the next. And finally, Jane Rendell in Sight Writing talks about recent developments of art have developed a more sophisticated understanding of how the viewer's experience comprising both perception and conception, varies according to cultural identity and geographic location, and has an intimate as well as public dimension. Again, which I think I was responding to in each of your works as I thought about them afterwards. And I'm going to stop sharing the screen now and go back. We'll go back to the images of the works. But those ideas are kind of rich, and I think the works are kind of rich and both respond to places and respond to the way we inhabit places. And finally, what I'll say is I kind of think they bridge, as I was going to people's studios and looking at these works and remembering seeing these works recently, I saw these works as kind of bridging a lot of different ways of responding to images, responding to making an image, and responding to looking at images in terms of crossing the boundaries between what is personal, what is public, what you might consider as a scene or a landscape or an interior, a still life, even the figure implied in works that don't show figures, and the figure taking the stage in works that have figures. And I didn't see the differences as separating the works. I saw the differences as reinforcing each other and reinforcing the power of the works. Hopefully that comes across to all of you. And I'm interested in kind of hearing your responses to how the exhibit came out, how the works converse with each other and converse across the different works that you're all showing. And I guess we can kind of go in alphabetical order, except switch Thea and Nancy so that Nancy can go first, and see if Nancy has any particular comments and wants to introduce herself and her work in any particular way or in relation to what she's engaging in currently or whatever. So I guess, Nancy, we can't see you, but I think we can hear you if you unmute yourself. And we can go from here. And again, please respond in any way you like. And I'm happy if this conversation goes in any direction that you all would like to take it.
Okay, sure. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Hi, everybody. My name is Nancy Agati. I'm actually currently in Sicily. So I think the data and not Wi-Fi is why you can't see me, but you can hear me. The piece that I have in the show is called Red Line Critical Trends. Unfortunately, I can't really speak about how the work interacts with the others until I get back. So Tom, maybe you could ask me specific questions that you want me to address, and that might be helpful.
Well, why don't you describe how the work both responds to specific points in terms of, correct me if I'm wrong, I see it as kind of mapping the world, discussing how we respond to planning space in the world, discussing kind of the rhythms of nature and contrasting the rhythms of nature with the rhythms of what we do when we plan space. Am I on the here, or am I?
Yeah, kind of. So a lot of my work is about water, and so as you can see, the bottom portion of the image is very watery. At the point that I made this piece, I had just done a series of really quick studies of trees, and I was thinking about the negative space in between trees as a way of sort of describing them. But at the same time, it was kind of in the midst of COVID, and I was looking at a lot of data, and there was an article about the heat island effect, which is basically that a lot of urban areas, especially urban areas that have been built up, are devoid of trees, and therefore they're hotter and are more sort of, what's the word I'm looking for, having effects with climate change because of the rising temperatures and dry conditions or flood conditions. So the whole piece is kind of like, yes, there's a map, there's several maps overlapping, but then there's also kind of indications of specific areas that are affected by the lack of trees. So there's like tree shapes in the background, but also kind of areas that are just sort of referencing urban settings. I think that's the best way I can describe it from afar. Any other questions about it?
Well, one thing I'm curious about is at the same time that it seems kind of describing facts in the world, it's actually a pretty emotional plea for how we should move forward and how we should avoid moving forward. All of these works to me kind of imply this narrative that the work is in the middle of. Does that kind of, because I'm familiar with your other works that are kind of specifically like the water area at the bottom, but this one it takes it in another direction in some ways, which I think is really powerful.
This one was kind of a surprise for me because I don't generally sort of address specific topics. The things are much more abstracted and kind of hint at things, and I feel like this one was really direct, and I haven't been able to do something like that since. But yeah, and I do think it's kind of like it connects to works that I've also done, which are installations, which are also about water or water management in urban areas. So it's kind of like a description of that in a way, or like a jumping off point of those.
Okay, and maybe rather than go more alphabetical, since we can see Elam's work on the left, the illusionist always knows, I believe, and then on the right we could see Kate McCammon's pieces, which both are kind of collaged, and there's this. Nancy's piece collages this notion of nature and how we respond to nature and what happens when we respond to nature in a certain way. I think the narratives go from between the works in an interesting fashion. So I don't know at this point whether Elam wants to respond to the work that's being shown.
Sure, I don't mind. Well, that particular piece, a lot of my work, okay, I'm hesitating because there's two parts of my sort of thoughts when I'm making work. There's a mystical element that I always think about. There's my dream life, which I also dive into. And then there's reality. And so what happens is a lot of times the paintings they're kind of like a composition or a compilation of those three ideals. So we live in a complicated world. I have this regular everyday meditation practice to keep me balanced, as well as making the art. And a lot of times I keep a journal and I write about my dreams. And I usually incorporate some of those ideals into the dreams. So my dialogue of place, space is kind of imagine. A little bit of it is symbolic, and it's also referencing what's happening on a daily basis in the news and in the world. So that particular piece, if anything, I can make a comparison to what Nancy just said would be that I'm expressing things through the figure, the use of the figure. She's expressing things through maybe possibly observation, but also I think that might be a little bit more of an easier to read piece. But ultimately, what I see within the whole show is that everyone's referencing things that are important to them, that there's these spaces that are, like they're focusing on things that mean a lot to them and what they observe. And ultimately, that's the tie-in between all of us. I use the figure because a part of it is earlier in my life, I was always interested in my identity and what that meant in the world and what that meant, the more immature me was interested in what people, how others viewed me. But then as I matured, I realized that I didn't care so much about how I was viewed, but that I was more interested in just understanding myself. And so then the work then moved forward into the ideas of future ideas, like where are we going? Where am I going? How will I get there? Is there anything else? Is there another place to go to? It's all those questions.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and I think actually, well, I'll throw in something here some people may have heard me say before, that Svetlana Alpers talks about the notion of the style of a work. And she says the only thing that's important about the style of the work, the only thing that's important about the way you present yourself and you present the world, for her, and may not be true for everyone, but the only thing that's important is, what if the world were the way it is depicted here? And I see that kind of as relevant to both Nancy's and Mikel's works, that you are depicting the way the world is, but you're also implying another part to the narrative. What if the world took into consideration all that it is and developed in a way that you're both kind of implying that things could move in a specific direction and perhaps transform or transition in a certain way. But I could be wrong about that. You all can correct me if you think I'm kind of going out onto a limb here or something.
No, I think you actually explained it really well. That's exactly how I feel about it. I think the idea is that I have my own visions of how I would like to see the world be and where I would like to see myself in it. And at the end of the day, I'm just one person. So I don't even know if I'll ever have the answer. But the good news is, when making art, I can just continue that story from one painting to the next.
Yeah, I would say for mine, it's definitely a wish that it could be a different way.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But and questioning, like, why have we developed in this certain way, and what if kind of thing.
Yeah, which brings in not only showing place and showing the environment and where we are in place and what the places are that we're inhabiting, but this issue of time, that the works kind of present a moment, and that moment has a next moment that is possible to go in a certain direction, but may not go in the direction that we want it to, and we're sort of trying to negotiate where it is we could go next with this, which touches on very broad issues, as what Schwabsky was saying, this notion that works of art are really deeply powerful. It can engage big ideas and big thoughts. And I guess as long as we're looking at these pieces, we could go on, see what Kate has to say about what we've been talking about and her works, which also engage kind of a place and where we are in the world and how it could move both from the past into the future and engage the present for us.
Yes, thank you, Tom, and thank you all for setting this up. I'm really energized by the conversation that's been had so far. It's making me think about my work in kind of a new way in the context to this conversation. But I might start just generally and say that this is a series called Journal Portraits. As you can see, there's a lot behind me in my studio. So I've been working on this for quite some time. It's a photo collage series, and it's inspired by old family photos and also journals, my journals, and also my dad's journals. I feel like that is a journaling practice is my practice for kind of keeping me grounded and balanced, my own sort of meditation. And so that definitely comes into the work. I photograph the journal pages and then print copies of old family photos and collage them in this way to create these sort of fractured portraits or portals into memories. And place definitely comes into the work. There are a lot of snippets of nostalgic places, homes, snippets of wallpaper, just sort of these fragments of places that I've lived or places that have been impactful in my life that have been kind of intertwined with my own identity. So I feel like these have sort of been a process in me trying to sort of understand my sense of self as well. But also, I'm really interested in the figure as a silhouette or a portal through which others can see themselves. And I think this conversation has been making me think a lot about how, in my own practice of making them, I'm sort of thinking it's sort of a processing of understanding why or how something came to be in my own life. And also, I am struck by the whole show and how everyone has a very unique way of expressing place and space in their work, and also this layering of materiality. So I was really excited to see some common threads between everyone's work, even though we all have a very different approach.
Mhm. Okay, does anyone have any comments about that as we move along? I mean, notice how these are all, the images contain really broad thoughts, like even this one, fence, about the interaction of human beings with the environment and the interactions of human beings with their own emotional and personal states. It to, I don't think we get any of us get very far away from this notion that we have bodies and we have emotions, and that that's what we engage in the works in some way, and that leads to other connections that we all express. I would say in very powerful and important and multi-layered ways.
This is Mike. Kate, I'm interested in the format that you've chosen for this, that, you're taking like photographs, I imagine different sizes and bits of writing, but then, putting them in this regular format. Then when it becomes so vast, like in your studio, it's sort of like this steady drumbeat of these portraits. So I'm curious about that.
Yeah, thank you, Mike. I definitely wanted them to be photo size. That was really important to me. And I feel like it's kind of speaking to memory and sort of this chaotic, there's kind of a chaotic fashion to them when you see the different collage elements and the fractured elements to them. But I wanted them to have this sort of regularity in terms of the whole installation. I think that's the key for me, is that I really do see these as an installation. And I wanted it to feel overwhelming when you step into the space and when you sort of encounter all of these different snippets and moments. And also, it's a lot about processing grief and loss in different parts of myself. So I kind of wanted to emphasize that by the number and the quantity of them, the experience, making this floor to ceiling installation. And I had another thought about that left my brain. But yeah, for me, it's kind of finding this balance between sort of the chaotic and the individual, but then also sort of this sort of balance and regularity in the whole installation, if that makes any sense.
Yes, thank you.
Is there anyone else who'd like to comment about what we've been talking about so far?
Yeah, I'll make a comment.
So I love I love these, and I love the the format you're using, and so I really loved seeing your studio with all the sort of display in the background, but also the format. Yeah, as you said, they're sort of journal-like in terms of the size and the orientation, but they also feel, and I don't know if this is intentional or not, but I feel they're sort of like icons, sort of like medieval icons and portraits that have sort of a spiritual nature to them. You know, I think the process of collage is always a sort of a process of discovering sort of things, you know, one thing next to another becomes something else. But these have that that sort of icon quality to them that I think is I'm finding really interesting. So I don't know if anybody else sees that or not, but.
Thank you for that comment. I love that connection.
Just to back on what you just said, Mark, I'm just thinking about, like, when you said icons, I was thinking about illuminated manuscripts and like these just miniature, wonderful glowing objects or book pages. And I don't know, I'm just agreeing with you and elaborating, I guess.
I mean, I'm really drawn to work in series too, because that's sort of how I work, and I like to work in multiples as well. So seeing that like sort of array of, I don't know how many you have in your studio, but even this little configuration of 9 is really, really exciting, and how they, you know, both the images within the collage itself, but also the way the collages respond to each other, and the format and the orientation of the 9 pieces is really, you know, there's another level there, and they start conversing with each other.
Thank you for that, Mark. I was really excited to be able to see more of an intimate grouping for this exhibition, because I'm so used to seeing them in a series of like 500 in my studio. So it was really a great experience to have Tom in my studio making really thoughtful selections and looking at different groupings. And yeah, just to see them in the context of this show helps me see them in a different way. So
Absolutely,
thank you for the comments.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, yes, I purposely went around, and as you can see behind Kate, it's both overwhelming, and yet they all really draw you in, as people have been commenting on. And I selected a series of 9 that were hung next to each other because somehow I thought I don't know whether they're all chronological or they seem connected to me, and I don't know whether Kate eventually puts them in chronological order or puts them in some kind of thematic order. But the order that these 9 were next to each other in her studio and made sense to me to be shown together and kind of to bring out the different aspects of her work. I mean, and notice how I think I mentioned in one of the things I wrote for this exhibit, this notion that Karl Ove Knausgaard brings up of a work of art that holds his attention as having an inexhaustible precision. It specifies something very, very definite for the viewer that you can immediately identify. And then as you spend more time with it, it seems to kind of go in different directions. I mean, just as going from Elam's to Nancy's to Kate's work, and then my work is next to Kate's, this notion that there's more than one thing going on in all of these works, and there's a sense of development and a sense of implied progression, a future that may or may not happen in one way or another. And I'll just briefly touch upon my work that's there in this case. And I actually selected my work after I saw everybody else's work, thinking that I should try to respond in works that I haven't shown as much, such as this one, but that I've made kind of as a way to develop my sense of how to condense a narrative, you might say. I mean, this being actually something I witnessed of somebody making deliveries in coolers and to a restaurant next door to where these 2 people were sitting, dining, and I just had this thought of what this situation meant in terms of the people involved and the circumstances involved, without trying to be overly specific, but to specify the things that I thought were most important in terms of the rhythm. And actually, Kate mentioned memory, and Ying Li isn't here, and I won't speak for her, but I'll talk a bit about her work, and other people can comment too, because the work that's next to this is actually a portrait of someone, and I think it's interesting to see what she does in a portrait and also in relation to her other work. I'm sorry, the work next to Mike's, which are also portraits, by the way. So I guess we can kind of, I'll just mention that I just thought it was interesting that I could see Ying Li's portrait of Jim as someone responding to things that we've been talking about all along, both that Mikel and Nancy and Kate and myself and Michael are talking about. But maybe then we should go back to Michael's work, which I forgot was in between these two. But
you can
makes
talk about
perfect
Ying.
sense.
It's fine. I mean, you can talk about Ying, that's fine.
I'll do that. I've done that a little bit, and I'll go back to that maybe when we get to other work. But I mean, actually, there's been a sense of portraying the world in all of these works and portraying a personal event of some kind or a personal response to events that's very deeply felt. So I don't know if Michael wants to talk about this work or other people.
Yes, sorry, my volume conked out for a second there, my speaker. So, well, I guess the things I paint come to me by chance. So I'm out and, you know, see things that happen momentarily. In this case, a pair of sunglasses on a table in the sunshine, which happened to catch both me and Tina in each lens. So I photograph these things and then take them back to my space and mull them over and ruminate and pull them apart and then rebuild them in paint. And, you know, it ends up being a portrait, but it's not a portrait because I'm always sort of sidling up to things. I don't think I could do straight ahead portrait. So I'm, you know, looking at things through things. That seems to sort of condense them and clarify them better, turns them into pictures within pictures, which excites me more than, you know, just plunking somebody down. And you know, it's also hard. So I'm like, well, how am I going to do it? I mean, I always feel like I'm kind of I'm reaching for the thing. I can never like handle it. You know, I always have to stretch to get it, you know. So I think it makes it more worthwhile. I try not to have a method where I can, okay, now I execute and it's done. And, you know, I need a certain amount of frustration and challenge in these things. And then, you know, after some time looking at them, I see it more for also like two people looking at each other and what does it mean? And, you know, it's like, oh, good grief, I'm in it. Tina's in it. What are we doing in there? So that part. So I'm not really thinking of that any meaning up front. It's the, you know, the thing itself. I'm captivated by something and it's inexplicable. Usually it has a lot to do with light that catches me. And then, you know, once the hook is in, I go from there.
Okay, any other thoughts on the work so far?
Well, I'd like to say I just like the idea of a world within a world in a sense, because the glasses represents these two figures. Obviously, it's catching a reflection, but on the other hand, the environment around the glasses is just kind of like this other external space that's different.
Yeah, it's a combination. They're locked together.
Yeah.
But two very different worlds in a way.
Yeah.
I also really like the your statement on responding to the light and just working towards a challenge and then kind of allowing it to happen and manifest the way that it does in a post reflection. So that kind of approach, I think as an artist is interesting and something I can relate to also. And like, just you're observing, you're challenging yourself, and then you're kind of remaining open to what might come. Like, what are those reflections about? What is the difference between those worlds? And I appreciate that.
Thank you.
I mean, I'm fascinated and was fascinated putting the show together by just how much people are focused on related things and important things and things that really carry a lot of weight. But I don't mean to imply that once one doesn't start making things that way, one just starts making something because they're absorbed in it, and then it kind of leads in different directions, which is what I see kind of in all the things we've been discussing so far.
Mike's piece is making me think about one of the quotes that you shared at the beginning, something about everyday painting. And this piece, I just love how it's this snippet of this everyday thing, you know, these sunglasses, but inside there's this magical world that's kind of talking about these relationships, and there's so much to find in there. So I love that it starts out with this everyday thing that becomes something so different, this other world that you can really just dive into.
Well, yes, and in all of these, there's been this personal, this social, this implied set of relationships between people, between our thoughts and emotions.
Tom, did you want to mention Ying's piece since she's not here?
Well, yes, I just we'll see in a minute her other piece, but I specifically wanted to include something that showed this notion of drawing and the individual and a personal reflection on an engagement with the world, if you want to put it that way. I mean, this is just I hope I'm telling the story right if she told it to me, but this is just somebody who works at Haverford College that she said, "Oh, let me draw your portrait," and so he sat down and she did, and I first actually was in Ying pays a lot of attention to color, and it fascinated me when I took her works and kind of put them in. I would remove the color by just decreasing the saturation, and actually the rhythm and the emotion, as well as the connection of this person to the world, in this case, to me became evident even when she removes some of the aspects that are most important to her. However, I would argue that she uses black, white, and that little bit of blue as a very evocative of what she's portraying here. I don't know if other people have responses to Ying's works or thoughts about it.
Yeah, I think this is a really beautiful portrait, as you just described. I think it shows also process and sort of almost because it seems to be drawn and erased and scratched and drawn again and sort of rethought and things moved and stuff. And it has a lot to say about the process the artist is going through, and sort of almost a struggle to get. I think I feel a lot about that in this drawing, and also in her painting, which is on the other side, which is very kind of very much about like the act of painting and act of creating, but it also kind of gets that the sort of the struggle of the artist trying to capture the figure and the personality in this drawing. I really love this drawing. I think it really the graphic qualities of it, the sort of energy, and then of course what becomes the portrait, you know, what really resonates, the person that's being portrayed here. So these are really exciting to me to see this.
Mhm. Yeah, and I'd say all of the things so far have kind of had some of those qualities that for me bounce back and forth between the works in an odd way, and kind of show how they develop these qualities through what Mark is describing and what we've been talking about. And then I guess since Mark has been speaking, now we're looking at Mark's work in the middle, which is lithograph, kind of bridging the space between Elam's work and then one of my pieces. And
Yeah, the two. Yeah, okay, go ahead.
I was going to say what you were saying about Ying's work is actually quite true of your work as well.
That's probably why I was responding in the way I was responding to that. There's a lot of at play in this work. So I spend a lot of time in South Jersey. I have some studio space down here, and in the sort of down the Delaware Bay and the marshes and sort of farmland stuff. And so the landscape is essentially flat. I mean, mostly the hills, things punctuated by trees. So you've got sort of farm fields and then these sort of marshes that go out into the bay. So I do a lot of plein air painting. And so I've done a lot of sort of studies and paintings, watercolors and oils down there. And then I've been translating them into lithographs and also translating them into collages. So this is actually all about process. It starts with, this is actually several little kind of vignettes that I kind of put collage together and then transferred onto a stone, and then took the stone and manipulated it and painted it and sort of fought with it to get the impression. So it's kind of in some ways a montage. It's still, in sort of all the work that I do is sort of landscape based, but it's all based on drawings that I've done, but they're kind of pieced together in this kind of other combination. So that's right now, that's kind of really what I'm interested in. A lot of it has to do with my background as a graphic designer. So I've been doing that for like my professional life and teaching graphic design, and the whole idea of sort of collage and montage is a big part of that discipline. Certainly a big part of the process. So that's kind of what I think is resonant in the work that I'm doing and what I'm trying to do. So a lot of it is kind of, riffing off of a certain theme, visual theme, and then kind of seeing what happens when I put one thing next to another, and how that builds. And so it's a little bit different than, it actually informs the way some of my plein air painting is. Site painting is produced, but so I really like this idea of, this looks very, I mean, it's lithography, so I'm really like, it's like, I struggle with the process because it's a complicated process, and then it becomes something else. I mean, this certainly feels like a print, but also feels like somewhat photographic, and then this sort of idea of montage, and there starts to be like a story might be happening in there, just by juxtaposing those, sort of three rectangles. So, and that's what I've tried to do. So a lot of my work is actually kind of, I don't have like a clear idea of where any of it's going. I suppose we could all say that, but a lot of it is sort of that improvisation and where it leads to, and then it becomes, hopefully for me, it starts to become sort of a suite of work that's very similar, and sort of riffing off the same idea and just different points of view of my own. So.
Okay. I mean, it's interesting to me that one aspect of this work, I don't even know if it's the primary aspect, is very similar to what I see in Nancy's work, which is there's a place or a landscape that's threatened. It feels whether it's threatened by natural forces or it's threatened by just the way we perceive it or misperceive it, still the process, it looks really engaging and pleasant, and then you start to see these tensions in it, which I think is what enlivens the work in some ways, which I think is in all these works, but especially in kind of the ones we've been talking about so far, this notion that they feel, oh, this looks like a kind of a nice afternoon or something, and then you see, well, but there's other things going on that come out of the works and kind of guide you to kind of think of what's really how are these works dynamic in a narrative way, and how is there a tension built into them? Which, again, I don't know that we really necessarily think about this when we're making the works, but it comes out because I don't think we can kind of get away from it. I think it's a motivating factor in a lot of general works, and that's why I think these works kind of typify a lot of important things going on in art making today, if I can be so bold to go that far on your behalf as well as my behalf.
I mean, I think that's an interesting reading. I mean, part of the landscape that I look at a lot is being really affected by climate change. It's really obvious, and parts of this area down here where the saline, the salt water has come into the fresh water and killed a lot of. So there's this kind of barren, sort of after the disaster kind of sensibility you get, or this encroaching kind of, in some ways, sort of seeing the future and sort of it's happy. So I think it ends up in my work, and not in an intentional way, but I think it becomes. I think part of it is the process, and too, and the fact that I'm like sort of unsure of where things are going to go and how the markings of the scratching kind of respond to each other, and then it has that. I think just the nature of that. The ink on paper has that, taking sort of what could be a sort of pleasant landscape and giving it a certain different kind of drama, a different kind of take on it. Some of the other lithographs I do look, they're all sort of these abstractions based on landscapes, but I've had people comment that they look like old 19th century daguerreotypes or something, because they're kind of, there's an image there, but I'm not really sure what it is. And I'm sort of interested in that, but that's all comes from the sort of process and discovery of what happens when I'm working with these materials. So yeah, I mean, one of the nice things today and looking at all our work together is sort of that idea of hearing what the artists have to say, but also sort of the interpretation of what you see in the work and what that brings out to the audience that is often necessarily not intended, but gives it more life and sort of more meaning. So thank you.
Any other comments or thoughts? So we're going to the other side of the room. Actually, why don't we look at Lisa's work, since it's there in front of us, and Thea's. I'll come back to mine in a few minutes.
I'm a little overwhelmed in speaking about my work, mostly because I am relating to things that every single one of my fellow exhibitors has said, and it's giving me kind of like just kind of this prism of the way that I'm seeing my work anew, and just commenting on one of, I think this was a recurring comment during the opening reception, was just how well the works were in conversation with each other. And, between Tom's choices and Tina's arrangement, how those, like all of these discussions we're talking about this like internal conversations that we have about the meanings of our work, but then how our work is perceived by others, but then yet again in a group exhibition, how we're all relating to the work that's around us in context. But anyway, these works that I included, I have two practices. I have this photography practice and an oil painting practice. Photography is super short and oil painting is long, like years long to finish a painting. And then the works that Tom chose were a relatively new process and experimentation for me, where I'm working with oil paint and graphite on paper. And they're kind of like this happy medium of time and how I'm in the time that it takes to create them, but also thinking about, if we're talking about the dialogues of place and space, like this idea of speeding and slowing time and the spaces in between. So not only is this actually a space in between in my practice, but it's also like meaningfully so. So like talking about borders, this one is Al-Jisr, which means bridge in Arabic. And is kind of like a memory that I have of passing over a well-known crossing between Jordan and Israel if you're Palestinian trying to get to Palestine. So this kind of layers of memory and feeling and passage and excitement, and the idea of borders as a place of like excitement and engagement and being able to see something else, but also a place of restriction and fear. And so I'm kind of like experimenting with those layered issues and layered feelings in my own experience, but also like, yeah.
Are there other thoughts or responses to these?
Well, I'd just like to say that I really liked what you had to say about time and the differences of approaches. And as I told you earlier, I'm in Italy, and your name means time. So I think that's kind of really cool.
Yeah, I love that. I think Volta is like in, if you tell someone to take a volta in Greek, it's like you're taking a leisurely stroll. Volta's a river in Ghana. Volta has like references to like the electric battery and science. I think I love that.
Yeah, that's really awesome. And this piece is beautiful. I can't wait to see it in person.
Thanks.
It also has a red line in it, so
Yeah, I connected that with Nancy's as well. So like thinking, what is the red line? Yeah, well, for me, it's like maybe like an actual memory of like this red cord that was running across the bus window, but also like that kind of implication of what a red line means.
yeah, and in the close-up, the way the natural forms and the patterns of things that people make intertwine is to me where the power and the emotion in the story is, and where actually it's why it's necessary that we have bodies to experience this in a way. It's necessary to understand that that's what happens when we look at these things, that they're visceral experiences that we have in relation to this.
Lisa, I'm curious about your presentation, that they're not framed or glazed, which would, sort of set them back in a way from the viewer. This way, they're very like here in the space. I'm curious to know your thinking about that.
Yeah, it's actually, that is something that I struggled with, and how to display them. I view them as they are cut unevenly from larger pieces of paper. I view them as fragments, and also think about them in a place of like unwholeness, right? So I don't like glass. I guess if I'm talking about entering and passing through borders, glass is a border, a frame is a border. And I think about, like, I don't like framing my oil paintings either. Like or photographs for that matter. So I when they're in my studio, well, now I have them hanging because that's the way that I've decided to hang them. But when I'm working on them, they're pinned into the wall. And even you can see in the presentation, I can't hide all the pinholes because I keep having to reposition them depending on how I'm working on the piece. So when I was thinking about different ways to approach hanging them in a space where you can't put things in the wall, so there's these restrictions for, I mean, in general, you don't like push pin into a gallery wall, right? So how am I going to hang these and display them? And to me, like a scroll makes sense with a fragment. So like this kind of, it is a frame in a sense, but it's one that's accessible. That was a long answer.
Thank you. I think accessible is definitely the operative word for it.
Yeah, I think it's a really appropriate way to present these too. I love the scroll idea. I love the idea of them being fragments and the unevenness of the, the final piece. And I can see in your, in the backdrop of your studio, then in many ways, that's the way they're meant to be. So there's, I think that's really appropriate and evocative.
Well, I guess we can move on to Thea's work, which is right there next to it. And Mark's work, one of Mark's works is hanging next to that. It's hanging between Lisa and Mark's work.
Yeah, I love being positioned between those works. I've been a little quiet just because one of my observations about the show as a whole is just I am having a lot of feelings in the sense of I think these are all very immediate, and they're really very deep in terms of how place is inside of us and then on these pages. So I'm also somebody who, I was thinking about what Mikel said at the beginning, and Kate, your practice of journaling. I mean, I came to painting as a form of meditation, and have spent a long time resisting talking, like putting talk on it. And Lisa actually kind of forced me last year to do that. But I'm really pleased also to be next to Lisa's work. I know that bridge. I've also had experiences of that bridge. And my own work, I think I know comes deeply from, so I'm Palestinian, and I grew up in Iran and Lebanon, and going back and forth to Palestine, where my family was from, have been in the United States for many decades now. And so there's a lot of ways that I carry all these places with me, places that I can go back to and that I can't go back to. And also carry like the different qualities of light in those places. And that's very much part of what it really appears in my work. It's not that I don't set out to make these places happen, and then they happen, they come to me. I'm also really, I'm playing a lot, I think you can see, with the questions of borders and boundaries, like where are those borders sharp and impassable? Where do they make things really stand out, and where are things softer and easier to cross into? Trying to think if there's other things I want to say about the work. I mean, I think that's a way that it's in conversation with so much of what people have been saying. That even though it's interesting, a lot of people at the show commented on the simplicity of these forms, which I think that many people were seeing as standing in contrast to other, other works in the exhibit. I think it's the layering where the complexity is, or those edges and not edges. And again, I think to what Mikel, what you said in the beginning, this kind of thing about the mystical, the dream life, and the reality. Those are all a piece of. These are places that are memories that are also emotions. I mean, places is not just a site, right? It's I don't know, it's kind of there's an interiority to that too. So yeah. And they come sometimes, I think, from, I mean, this one's called What Is Left Behind, and I think there's so much I hope you feel like you can go in, and behind there's a whole story of things that are left behind, including the etching into the and sometimes I actually write in, like, sometimes some of that etching will start as words in Arabic and then sort of just get covered over and layered over. Anyway, I'm going to stop there because I think I've said a lot.
Well, yes, as Theodore Adorno said, paintings and images do something different than what words do. And they're poetic and lyrical, but in a different mode of some kind. And for instance, in this piece, I just feel like usually you think if you want to see something clear, you get closer to it. But I feel like I'm very close to something I can't quite see, which is sort of a point to me. I mean, I think that's a very emotional state, to kind of be so close you can't see what's right in front of you. But it's also it's odd that they're both so geometric and so emotional at the same time. And I could say that about a lot of things we've been talking about, that they seem there's a space between you and the work, but the space becomes filled by how you engage the work, is the best way I can put it simply without going into lots of and again, all of these works for me contain really big ideas, which not all some contemporary art is very good at being powerful in the way it presents things, but not being able to contain big ideas in the end. And that's okay too, but these works for me do contain big ideas, which is what one of the things I value about all of the things we've been talking about.
I laugh because sometimes I try to get away from my geometric shapes, and they just keep like slamming back in, I mean, I have some pieces that aren't, but so much, it's like, there it is again. So I don't know.
Well, your comment about the layering too, I think is really important. These are really beautiful, and that, as part of the, your process and your sort of discovery, and the layering, leaving things that you had started with, but leaving a hint of it still there, and that sort of memory of what had happened and transpired in your, the act of painting, I think is really so resonant. These are beautiful, and the little bits of scratching and maybe some writing that you've done, I think that that is gives these such an incredible depth. I mean, I think that I'm really drawn to them compositionally. I think they're really stunning, and and the painterly quality of these as well. But that idea of like sort of leaving, leaving a hint of what you've done before, you're sort of eliminating most of it, but giving us a little bit of a hint of what was there is really resonant in these. I think they're really wonderful. And I loved when you panned back, when Tina panned back from that wall. It was like all of the paintings on that wall are all kind of on both sides, but this was really pretty obvious, seeing you know, the connection between all the works on this this wall. So kudos to Tina for laying them out so beautifully.
Yeah. Yes, I agree, and especially all of the sections. And this one is the first. If you're entering the front door, this is, you kind of see these works, and to me, they kind of introduce the exhibit to you in one way, which I assume is sort of part of Tina's idea. Although, it's amazing to me how much thought has to go into getting these things to work that way. But both, as Thea was saying in her works, and as Mark, you were commenting on, but then in getting them coordinated when they're hung in this way.
I'm also really enamored with this wall and how the work is really speaking to each other. And with Thea's work, I think a lot about weight, emotional weight, physical weight, and there's kind of this heaviness, but also this beautiful lightness with the hints and traces that are in the work. And I love it, especially in relationship to Lisa's work, because there's this beautiful fragility to Lisa's work and the wispy, airy quality of the marks. And I love that in contrast to Thea's work. But Thea's work, I feel like, has that same quality to it, with that attention to edges and how the colors or the forms meet each other. There is sort of this, it feels like these forms could just slip and fall apart, but they still have this beautiful weight to them as well.
Okay, and in terms of this section, we have the piece of Mark's, which actually Mark's described well when he described Thea's work, interestingly, and which is, as I understand it, is a painted lithograph that is painted on. So there's a lot that these works share just in their physical relationship to the world and the materials, and then that's continued on in Ying Li's work. But I don't know if Mark wants to say any more about this piece, which I'll comment on, is included in part because it took me I don't know if there's a landscape there or a place, but I feel like it's there again, and like in Thea's work, I can't quite see it, and then Ying's work too. But I don't know if Mark, you want to say anything about that piece right here.
Well, I mean, as you described, it's a lithograph, part of a series of lithographs that I then sort of paint into. And so again, I'm leaving some of the tonal values from the print underneath the paint, and it is, you know, part of. I mean, it's an abstraction, but it's a landscape, and it's a. You know, it could be a mart. There could be a farmhouse there. There's a lot of little bits and pieces of memory of what I, you know, look at a lot. All in there. And again, it's also the sort of formal aspect of composition. And what I'm enjoying about the printmaking is I take prints that are sort of unsuccessful and then rework them. And that's what this is evidence of. So, yeah.
Okay. And to me, it kind of reflects things that we've been talking about already, such as water and place. And I mean, I see it kind of as this odd combination of a building and water and solid and kind of light or fire or something, which is sort of my comment on the work on the other side of the wall that I painted of a forge, which is basically fire, stone, and air. And this is maybe fire, stone, and water, which comes up in these works repeatedly. And in Ying Li's work too, it's the rhythm of the light and the color which becomes so powerful. And this is, as I understand it, Ying Li for most of these is looking at what she's painting, and she's in this case more or less standing on her front porch on Wyoming Street, looking standing on her front porch looking towards Wyoming Street. That's more or less the title of the painting. And I don't know if anybody else has any comments to make about this. It's just intriguing to me how many of these things we've been talking about this brings in. And of course, the thickness of the paint, which is both what engages you and kind of pushes you away in some ways. It pushes you away from the surface, certainly. And I don't know if anybody else has any comments about this work.
The surface is incredible.
Yeah.
I loved seeing this in relation to her drawing practice.
Yeah, I didn't specifically ask her about that, but I'm hoping she also would agree with that, because that's really a powerful thing to me. And for having so little to do with things you can name with words, it's very poetic to me because of its rhythms, and it's like a language which you can barely hear, but is really communicating something. Or it's like listening to a language that you don't speak, but you understand what's being said somehow. Now, I guess we can see whether Mike and Mikel and Lisa want to add things to the discussion of their work in relation to these, like what Mike was talking about in terms of his the sunglass pair, for instance.
Well, the origin of this was me sitting in a car at an intersection and then taking a picture out the window of the side view mirror. So because it was beautiful, and I see these beautiful things, and if I don't act, they're lost. So I think a lot of it is that, just in a nutshell, that I want to hang on to these things because we're just flying through, and sometimes you don't just want to do what you have to do or what's practical or logical. You want to, you've got to make an effort here. So for me personally, I can then look at this and remember, because this is an older piece from 2009. And, I find the more time I have between making something, I'm more aware of where I was and what I was thinking about at that time. And, I can look at them while I'm making them, I'm not aware of that. I've got the impulse to do it, and I do it, and then you sort of sort it out after the fact. You know, it's not such a logical or rational endeavor. I mean, the light and the composition and everything about it was just captivating to me. A dirty old side view mirror, but this beautiful, beautiful scene in it. So, you know, those are the things that I'm looking for, but I'm not looking for. You know, they sort of fall on my head.
Yeah, and if I had the words, I'd start talking about this, being aware of something happening just before this, and as you were saying, if you don't capture it, it's gone. But I'll also point out that it records time in a very specific way that to me is, I'm sure the photograph you took of this is beautiful, but I'm sure it records time in a different way than this image does. And going back to the recent ones we've been talking about on this wall, they're a record of kind of the light and the time and the space and the place they were taken, and the narrative that comes out of that place, and you being in that place.
Yeah, like just there, just for a minute, not worrying about what I did or worrying about what's coming next, just, you know, out of my own head for a second, you know, not naming things.
And so, Mikel, this is a very different painting than the other one,
Yes.
which I think is marvelous, and yet it's the same kind of, it's the same voice. I wouldn't mistake either of these for paintings by anybody else.
Oh,
And
thank
again,
you.
that about all the things we've been talking about.
So, I mean, you know, it's so much is happening through my sense of you know, I have to say meditation again, journaling, all of these things, dreams. They're just, and that particular one is a newer piece than the other one, and there's a whole series of them. But in this dream, I am the figure that you can't see, and I'm sort of moving through this kind of world, and I see this figure, and the figure is sort of having this dialogue with natural things like birds and all sorts of sort of weird sort of fluid like things are moving around in the piece. And it's really like it's kind of a ritual. It's kind of if I had to analyze it, I would say that a lot of it has to do with my studies of like my natural origins, like my ancestral origins, my roots. Because I think like so much I don't understand, being that I was born here, being that a lot of my culture has been lost in some ways. So I kind of have read a lot of books, and I'm just trying to understand it, but it's popping up in my dreams. And I feel the need to have to try to kind of capture it. And along with that, I work in collage sometimes. That piece is a collage piece of, it is actually on a wood panel, and there's actually like a little insert of wood in there. But I like mixing mediums together. So, you know, what happens is that at a certain point, the image from the journal or from my journaling part of it, the words turn into images. But then at a certain point with the materials, I allow the materials to sort of take off and go in the direction that they want to go in. So that's probably it in a nutshell.
And so are there other thoughts about Mikel's piece or this piece by Lisa? I don't know if Lisa wants to add anything to what she said before.
I want to comment on on Mikel's piece actually in relation to this one. One of the things that well, first I just love the way that the layering and the all the different textures, just the physical beauty of Mikel's painting
Thank you.
It's engaging and absorbing. And one of the things that you just said that, and I look at them and I'm like, oh, I can relate. I'm thinking about, Tom, when you introduced us all as having some kind of like an element of anxiety, you know, like not that I'm projecting that on you, Mikel, but I'm just thinking about my own, like when I look at this piece that I did next to Mikel's, which I called The Power and Helplessness of Crossing Borders on Screens, that anxiety to me is very present, like not only in like what I was thinking about when I was making the piece, but also I think in the mark making. And in relation to that title and idea, I like what Mikel, you just said about ritual.
Yeah.
And like, what is the ritual of over time of the things that we do and the experiences that we have, and how does that like lead us to new places or whatever. So like just kind of the dynamic nature of culture and ritual as something that we do that's maybe based in like history and tradition and experience, but also the way that it changes based on the way that we apply it. I guess.
Could I add one thing?
Mm-hmm.
With all of the works, that there's obviously a real incredible thread. Tom, you have a really great vision for that. But with all the works, and everyone's practice is different, and which is what I love, because I personally, even though I don't make work like any of the rest of you, we're all different. I see the thread. Like if I was to make a work like that, I think I would try to emulate some of the things that I've seen in this show. But the main thing is that there's this kind of, there's like this pathway. It's like a pathway. Everyone is showing like some sort of like thing that you want, you're led into it, but then you want to investigate behind it. So there's all these layers you want to peer through. You want to see like, where is it going to take me? Is it going to influence the way that I'm thinking? You know, like with Thea's work, from across the room, I just see like these really incredible colors and patterns. But the closer you get, you start to see like all of the sort of, you know, the lines and the scratchings and what could possibly be a word. So everyone's work like causes me to want to investigate like deeper beyond just the visceral.
Well, I guess we've gone on for about an hour and a half now or so. And I don't know if I'm happy to listen to what anybody has to add, but I'm also happy. I think we've really summed things up. And I think if anybody feels like there's something they need to say that they haven't said, I think it'd be fine to hear it now. But otherwise, I think we've said a lot, and I don't know that I feel like anything needs to be added at this point. But I'm happy to leave that up to everyone or anyone else.
Well, I would say it's an honor to be included with you guys. So thank you.
I feel the same.
Wonderful show.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I think it's a very important show. I hope people, if if I had to pick a show to say, look what's going on in Philadelphia now, look what's going on in the art world in this around the world now, I would find this an important thing to look at, and your work's important things to look at.
Thank you, Tom.
Yes,
else?
Thank you, Tom.
So
Thank you.
much.
Thank you. It's really
Yes,
a
Thank
so
you.
much.
pleasure. Yep, thank you.
And thank you for everyone for being here tonight. The show is up through September 29th. So we hope people come down and see it. And everything's also available on the website, ceruleanarts.com. So thanks again and have a great night.
Thank you.
you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Right.